Welcome to the Designing Music Now podcast, a podcast dedicated to the craft of creating music for video games and interactive media. I'm your host, Dale Crowley.
And I'm Chanel Summers.
Our guest today is composer Garry Schyman. Okay, so Garry, for the rest of our time here, I'd like to talk more about orchestration techniques that you use in your music. So let's start talking about a style that you use a lot in Bioshock called musique concrète. And I know Chanel has a huge affinity to that style of music as well. So can you talk about that and what were your inspirations? Was it Pierre Henry, anyone else?
No, it wasn't any particular composer. Musique concrète, for those who are unfamiliar, is basically just taking sounds from the real world and sort of creating sound montages with those elements. And so it was really just that alone inspired me, that the concept of musique concrète. Now, real music, and so musique concrète is real musique concrète is using just those elements. I just incorporated into some of the scores in Bioshock sounds that came from the real world. So, for instance, I had there was a part of the world of Bioshock where as it was originally described to me, and these worlds and these levels and these places in Rapture kind of got changed, but it was like, this is where the people live. This is their and of course it's this really dysfunctional world. So I started to think, well, what about people? What about human breath and breathing? Could that be an instrument? And I did a Google search, for that, and I found some website, which I'm sure doesn't even exist anymore, from some doctor who dealt with lung disease, and he recorded the breathing of people with really serious illnesses, including the death rattle and all these different sounds, and you could just download it from his site. And so I did, and I incorporated like the death rattle and other breathing effects into this cue, and it was really a cool effect. You got to be careful with those things because you don't want to be fighting some sound effect in the real world, or you don't want to confuse. So very often I would take and then digitally alter them a little bit so they kind of sounded like breathing, but maybe not. I didn't want the player to be confused that someone is breathing over your shoulder, so you have to use it in a musical way. So I would incorporate that into the score. And so is that musique concrète? It's more influenced by musique concrète than true, pure musique concrète. So but I did use that in a number of cues. I would go to the fisheries level. They called it the fisheries. It ended up being something else. And so I used like a buoy bell as part of the music. What do they call the pipe when like in the Navy when you pipe someone on board? That really kind of I used that in a combat cue, and so that's what I would call musique concrète. But is that true musique concrète? Probably the purist would be would be turning up their noses right now. That is not real musique concrète. And I would agree with them. I'd say you're right.
Well, then, yeah, and you'd also have to be like going back to splicing tape and using discs and stuff like that as well. So to be super pure about it.
Exactly. So I didn't do any of that. So is it really musique concrète? It's more influenced by music.
Right. And did you sample it so that you could pitch it? Like some of the electricity sounds or things like that? Did you pitch, Ben, or use your sampler for that? Or just did you include them in the score?
I would, the way I pitch it, I drop it into Contact. And then depending on which note you play, it would automatically sort of pitch it over. I would use that. And sometimes even create like a cluster of breathing tones, you know what I'm saying, and therefore make it more breathing like, but like, what is that sound? And it would be very scary. And of course that was what I was really attempting to achieve, something that really kind of had this sort of bizarre scariness to it.
Awesome. Yeah, no, I mean, I just love when experimental techniques are used, like blurring the lines between music and sound, using found sounds, doing whatever you can to create a musical experience. I think, you should do whatever. You should be, what I like to say is, be a mad scientist that meets art.
Yes, absolutely. I mean, we're in such an interesting time. Really, you can do anything. There is no music of this period. It's sort of like a hodgepodge of styles and mashups, and really, it's just a fantastic thing. In some ways, you have to. What your job is to limit yourself. Like
yes.
Like you can't do everything, or it becomes less effective. You need to find something that you focus on. And in fact, like on Bioshock Infinite, we decided that small string ensembles would be the score. Even though that wasn't a matter of budget, they had plenty of money. We could have gone to London and recorded with a 90-piece orchestra if that was the style, but that proved to be inappropriate. Instead, these small string ensembles really created a uniqueness to the sound and approach. So it was the limitations again.
Yeah.
So it's interesting. So it's like limitations in an unlimited world. Part of what a composer has to do is to make good choices and interesting choices.
The decision to go small and intimate with Bioshock Infinite, I think, if I understand what happened, is you actually came up with Elizabeth's theme, which was something you did on your own dime with a cello and cello and violin, right? Initially?
Yes.
And then submitted that to
Yes.
Jim Bonney, and he loved it, and or maybe Ken Levine. They probably both took that, and then they said, okay, that's what we're going to do for the rest of the score. Is that how it happened, or did they have some idea beforehand that they wanted it to be smaller?
No, that was really sort of the how it unfolded. I played it for Jim. Jim was like, "Well, I really like this," and he didn't know how Ken would respond. And then Ken responded over the top. He said, "I love this. This is really fantastic." And the music is super simple. It's just really, really basic and simple. But that really appealed to him, and it was also sort of very different from the original Bioshock, which he also wanted to. And so that was really when we. And the way, I've never worked like this before, and I may never do this again, because you sort of need the unique circumstances. But one of the things with Ken was he really responded to live instruments much more than to samples, so especially solo string instruments. So because we had the money, I said to Jim, I go, let me just keep recording with small string ensembles each month, and let's deliver that. So I literally was doing demos all the time with string quartets and string trios, or so often Jim heard them beforehand, but we didn't play them for Ken until it was recorded. And sure enough, when they were recorded really passionately by like some of the best players in LA, it totally sold them to him, and he really came on board. So I probably had 20 recording sessions, 3 hours here, 3 hours there, and we would just get these 8, 10, 15 minutes of music recorded, and that was how the score unfolded. And I've never worked that way before, because usually you save the recording to the very end when everything's approved and ready to go, and then okay, boom, pull the trigger, hire the orchestra, and everything just sounds better because you got the orchestra there, But in this, it was really quite different, and it turned out to be a really cool way of working.
That's impressive how many that you were able to go out on a limb and do that yourself. And because often, there are so many different revisions often. And in fact, I wanted to ask you that, how many times did it take typically for them to approve a cue? Was it often the first time, or were there 5 revisions, 12 revisions? What was the general process?
Once I found the style, it flowed pretty quickly. But before that, there was a lot of experimentation that was ended up getting rejected. For instance, there was a lot of indecision amongst all of us about whether, okay, all these intimate and interesting interior cues and the Lutece twins and all that kind of stuff would be really cool with this small string ensemble, but surely combat has to be a big orchestra. I thought that originally too. I said, okay, but how are we going to play combat with a string quartet? You know, and but it was really Ken Levine who said no, and I wrote a couple of orchestral style combat cues, and they were really good cues. Nothing wrong with them at all. But Ken and everyone was like, yeah, that's great. And then Ken said, no, that's wrong. It's not working for me. So I went back and said, okay, let me go in with with one of these groups and try combat music. Let's hear what it sounds like with 3 instruments or 4 instruments. And I added some percussion, and it turned out to be really cool and unique. I don't think it sounds like anybody else's combat music. So that ended up going in that direction for the whole score. And then once we all bought in on it, you know, it's like we do the string quartet, we do like the combat, and then I go, let's double it. But doubling it actually took the edges off of it. It became less intense by doubling it, because instead of all those edgy attacks, they kind of got rounded off by, you know, they're playing against each other. So doubling it actually softened the edges. So we ended up, I thought, with really cool combat music and really unique combat music by sticking with this approach. And so, yeah, that was something unexpected, but I learned actually a lot from it.
Cool. So what are some of the other techniques that you use when you're composing music for these games? So aleatoric is one that we've gone over. What about scordatura and harmonics and things like that? Glissando. What are some of the other techniques that you use to add?
I don't think I've ever used scordatura. That scordatura is where you detune a string or something. I don't think I've ever asked. I'm trying to think if I've ever asked a player to detune like a violin or a thing. But yeah, I mean, all those, I use everything. I mean, sometimes you write really simple, very tonal music. Certainly Bioshock's full of that, Bioshock Infinite. And then you write these very complex cues, and sometimes you're writing harmonically nuanced and interesting stuff, you know, that really you're thinking a lot about the harmonies, and they're not just triadic harmonies, they're complex harmonies, and those can be quite interesting. So I mean, I will use anything. I will use anything I can possibly use. That if it works, I will do it. I don't have any stylistic hat, and anything outside of this I won't try. I would probably not be the best hip hop composer. You wouldn't hire me for rap or hip hop, but you know, if it's, you know, a scoring technique, I'm happy to try it, and if it works, you know.
So the use of aleatoric music was used extensively in Bioshock 1 and 2, and a little bit less so in Bioshock Infinite. Is it? Would you say?
No, we used it in Infinite for the combat. Parts of the combat music. The combat cues could actually be divided into 2 different styles of combat cues. There were kinds that were like through composed, that were just played, just the notes on the page, and then others were montages of aleatoric techniques that I would like write really violent sounding aleatoric techniques, and then we'd record them, and then I would assemble cues from these aleatoric snippets, some as short as, you know, 6 or 7 seconds, some as long as 20 seconds, and they would get put together. I'd overlap them and then add percussion, and they produce really interesting results. So it would be one of the two.
So how do you score your aleatoric music? What techniques do you use to notate that for the players?
Well, there's a lot of standard scoring, and it's actually when I first started, everything was paper and pencil. I actually had this big desk, a piano desk, and it was made out of plexiglass, and it would sit on my piano, and I'd put big pieces of music, scoring sheets, and sit there with my paper and pencil, and of course the most important part, the eraser, and I would write music, and that we didn't hear it. I mean, I'd play the piano, but no one would hear it really until the live players got a hold of it. But I've stopped using paper and pencil, except writing aleatoric music, which there's no way to put that into, I use Motu's DP, digital performer. There's no way to put that in digital performer. So I actually pull out my scoring and I write it out, and then I have my orchestrator take what I've written on paper and put it into Sibelius, which Sibelius does a fantastic job. All those extended techniques are available to the orchestrator or the composer in Sibelius. So, and there are a lot of standard techniques, whether it's a box around two notes and say players play any note in between, and including these two notes and in between, and then slowly gliss up, and you can write a squiggly line, and you can there's a lot of different things you can do that players are very familiar with and have absolutely no difficulty achieving fairly.
So that was my next question. The players, are they trained? I mean, from their, I guess, classical training to be able to read this and then play it, and then are they upset when they go through a lot of bow string, rosin and bows and stuff like that?
No, they are used to it. I do remember on Bioshock Infinite, actually it wasn't Infinite, it was one of the downloadable games after Bioshock Infinite came, and I scored 2 of those, and I wrote this technique called colegno, and colegno is you're tapping with wood on the strings, the wood of your bow, on the strings. Now most players will bring a pencil when they're doing the colegno, so they don't have to take their bows. A bow can actually be worth thousands and tens of thousands of dollars. So, but one of the bass players broke his bow, tapping using the technique, and he had to leave because he didn't have anything to play his instrument with anymore. So I felt terrible about that, but I kind of felt like, well, why didn't you bring a pencil? I mean, they should, but he so yeah, but they don't. It's really, if they've played any music, I mean, these techniques, aleatoric techniques, people still hear them and say, oh, that's so modern. Well, they've been around since the 1950s. So that's like, what, 65 years, Mm-hmm. It's really, and players, any of them who have learned or have been learn how to play Penderecki or Ligeti or John Crigliano, all those composers use those techniques extensively. So they are not unfamiliar to most players. Certainly not in LA, not in London, I've been in Seattle, we recorded Shadows of Mordor. These techniques are quickly, they just nail them.
Fantastic. And where did you learn how to do it? Or learn how to write?
By listening to the music and studying the scores. That's the best way to do it. But you need to look at, so you need to hear some technique. You'll hear something, you go, wow, that's so amazing. How did he achieve that? How did that composer get that sound? And then you look at the score and you go, oh, okay, that makes sense. I see that. I can see exactly. And if you look at it enough, all of a sudden you can close your eyes and imagine techniques. You start to really just be able to picture techniques. There's a lot of the usual things that are being asked, clusters and detuning by quarter tone, but once you start doing it, you can just imagine new techniques, and it's just wonderfully effective. I mean, if you listen to John Williams scores, like from Close Encounters or something, going back to then, and he used a bunch of those techniques in that score, or in what's the score with the spiders and with the Tom Cruise? It's in the future. Minority Report. In Minority in his score. Yeah, in Minority Report, he uses a ton of these techniques, and then then you can use them almost as a background, and then write tonal like melodies over them. You hear even in Star Wars, you can see these, and so he just uses them freely, and then writes over them. So it's these techniques are really they're not really new anymore, but they're really effective when used properly, and you can always conceive of new ones. And again, when I talk to my students about that, I go, you do not have to have an orchestra. You can do it with you can go out and buy a fiddle, and even if you don't play it, you can get some really creepy, funky sounds out of it. Because you don't have to play it beautifully. You can do scratchy, weird stuff and get some cool stuff out of it.
Oh, I've got it. I need to send you some students of mine stuff that they did based on those principles.
Cool.
For an exercise in my class where we kind of realize a emotion or feeling through sound design. So I'll give them like a different word. So one time I gave them mystery and danger, and then another semester I gave them love and romance, and then another semester I gave them envy. So I definitely want to share some of these student pieces with you, because I think you'll really enjoy them. They did amazing jobs.
Cool. I'd love to hear them. Please.
And the Bioshock, so you mentioned spiders. I think the Bioshock music, it really sounds very insectoid a lot, especially the way the combat scenes are just so chaotic and disturbing.
Thank you. Yeah, I mean, that's what they wanted. I mean, have you played Bioshock, Dale? Did you ever?
Oh, all three of them.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, especially like Bioshock 1 was so cool because it was quite different, from what typical games had been. I mean, I just thought, and they wanted something really unusual. I had a great audio director, Emily Ridgeway, and she was just so creative, and she didn't know what exactly the sound should be for Bioshock, but she knew when I found it, and she immediately said, yep, that's the sound, that's awesome, that's totally it. And another audio director might have been uncertain or not willing to be that experimental, but she totally was, and so she was great. Having a partner to work with like that, a creative partner, was really fantastic.
Cool. And what I've noticed in your scores is each one of them Garry Schyman is in there. You can hear it, but each one has its own character. So Bioshock 1 and 2 are more similar, but Bioshock Infinite different. Then when you get into Dante's Inferno, it's a totally different character to it. Of course, you've got the choirs and the choral effect there. And then, of course, Shadows of Mordor, again, a very heavy, dark, deep sense and style and ambiance there. How do you achieve that? I know you spend a lot of time coming up with the concept and before you begin the writing, but what other techniques or things do you use for inspiration to make sure that each one of these scores that you do is unique?
Yeah, I try to be inspired by the project. I try to find what is unique about this project, and I literally will close my eyes and try to imagine music almost before I play any music or experiment. I'll go, what is it about this? And I really try to explore it, and even I do find it very useful to give myself a challenge or a problem before I go to sleep, and then get up in the morning and immediately tackle that problem. And I find that really can produce the subconscious mind can produce really interesting results from things like that. And again, just closing my eyes and imagining what is it, the essence is this about, So I will start trying to visualize what it is, and then I'll start experimenting with sounds and ideas until I come up with stuff. And I don't always get it on the first trial. So then I'll get excited about something and send it over, and they'll go, no, that's not it. Okay. That happened a lot on Bioshock, actually. I tried a lot of stuff, and then until finally one day, and I knew, as soon as I found it, I knew it was it. I go, oh, this is it. Emily's gonna love this. And I sent it over to her, and she goes, that's it. That's the sound of Bioshock. And
wow.
Nice. I just totally got it, and I knew I had tried like a ton of stuff, but that when I found it, which was really taking some really soft, aleatoric, kind of dark textures, and then taking solo violins, doing sort of these more melodic, sort of Bergian kind of melodies over that. That sort of meandered. They weren't quite atonal, but they weren't quite tonal. They just sort of had their own logic to them. But they were sort of weird and mysterious over this aleatoric stuff. And as soon as she heard that, I was like, yeah, that's it. And I was like, yeah, that's it. And so that really was what, and then everything else was adding those textures and aleatoric textures, unique ones, and adding the music concrete, but always keeping a lot of these solo violins and cellos as part of the score as well.
So in Dante's Inferno, what was your inspiration there? And obviously you're in hell. You're going deper and deeper into hell. You're defeating Lucifer. Hell. You've got the Queen of Hell. You've got this great poet. When did you have that aha moment? What was it in a dream, like you mentioned earlier, sort of through sleeping and the subconscious mind and letting that bubble to the surface, or what was it in Dante's Inferno?
It really was the world. It was hell. It was really like, how do you play it? And I remember I wrote a theme that was completely wrong. It was just really way off, and I sent it to Paul Gorman, the audio director, and he said, no, that's not it. So, and then the second theme I came up with was the theme for Dante's Inferno. And as soon as I played it, I went, this is really cool. Which is just like bomb, da 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 da, and I could just imagine it orchestrated and choir on it, and he said, yeah, that's really cool. And then I was just being inspired by the individual parts of the game that he was sending me. Okay, here's you're in lust and this lust combat. One thing that was actually very cool that Paul came up with was like, on the lust level, since I mentioned lust, was I was just making everything kind of dark and dissonant. But he goes, what if lust level was more like late romantic music, like Mahler or whatever, or like Girl Eater by Schoenberg? And I go, that's really cool. That's really interesting. So I wrote some really nice music. I had a lot of fun with that, being able to get away from the really completely dark, terrifying textures. Because lust, the level of lust was all about these individuals could never fulfill. They were feeling the desires, but their desires were never fulfilled. So that was the idea. So that was really fun. I mean, I don't hold back in saying that my people I work with really help me, because they give me ideas. They know their game or their film or TV, and they tell me what it needs, and then I go, oh, okay. Yeah, that's really cool. And then I write the music, but it's like they're inspiring me and telling me things that I need to know, and I take that really seriously. It's really important to film, TV, games. These are all collaborative arts,
Absolutely. Yeah, I find that to be the case every time. They're always right, even as much as it might upset me that when I think I've written the best song for that particular thing, when they say that it should be more of this or more of that, it really does push it in the right direction and right into the slot where it needs to be.
Yeah, they know. I mean, there are people who are perverse and jerks,
or don't know music. That's another problem, is they don't understand music well. That's always
right. Or they can't tell you what they want. They only know what they don't want, and that can be pretty frustrating. Yeah. But yeah, I mean, they just have an insight into their project, and they want you to succeed. So, but they want it to be right.
So on to Shadows of Mordor. Obviously, you had a lot of inspiration there from the film music and other things. What did give you that sense to in Shadows of Mordor? What was your inspiration? What was the overarching theme that gave you that inspiration?
Well, we were asked not to imitate Howard Shore's music, and fortunately, I hadn't heard a lot, because I hadn't seen a lot of the of the Lord of the Rings movies. To be honest, I hadn't. I saw one of them, and the music worked very well, but it hadn't stood out in my. I hadn't purchased the score or anything like that, so it was easy to avoid it, at least consciously, because there was nothing to consciously imitate. So I just really went on the visuals that and what the game was about, and it has its own really unique vibe to it, and I'm really glad it turned out to be such an interesting game. I didn't know. You never know when you're working on a game. The game could be brilliant or not so brilliant, and you sort of don't know until it comes out, it's all finished, and then you have an opportunity to play it, and then other people are reacting to it, etc.
So Bioshock, Shadows of Mordor, Dante's Inferno, these are all very, very dark, insane, heavy worlds. What is it that draws you to these, or that maybe they drew themselves to you? Because you're a very bubbly and positive person, but all of these games are very dark.
The thing that drew me to them is that they paid me money to do it. No, I mean, I it's not like I have a shingle in front of my house that says Garry Schyman, dark, sinister, scary, eerie music. Enter at your own risk. No, you kind of, I don't know how those things evolve. I mean, I did Destroy All Humans. That was sort of, even though they were sort of kind of dark-ish, they had tongue-in-cheek
right,
vibe to them. Yeah. So, I work on what people hire me to do. If someone hired me to do a comedy, I'd probably say yes, I wouldn't, I don't turn down stuff because it's not dark enough, No, that's way too light. I won't touch that.
And what's the primary technique for bringing darkness to a score? Is it the low strings, the low horns, or something else?
No, I wouldn't say it's any particular register. I think the entire register from low to high can be quite menacing. And in fact, I think, in general, you don't want to, if you do too much of anything, it starts to turn into wallpaper. Mm-hmm. So you don't notice it after a while. If it's always in the same register and always kind of similar sound. So you're actually always thinking about the music. How can I keep it fresh, and how can I, and you can do that by changing. You can go from low to high, and then all of a sudden incorporate the middle or whatever. So you're good orchestration is not always, but usually doing that. Kind of freshening the palette. If you listen to like Ravel, one of my favorite composers, and look at his orchestration. He's just always trading instruments. And flute is going into the oboes, going into the to the violins or whatever, and it's all this color is sort of just unfolding, and keeping the music interesting and keeping the ear engaged. So you go, oh, what's that? Oh, what's that?
So it's more the harmonics than the register. So do you use a lot of diminished chords, a lot of, I guess, complex chords?
Well, yeah, I mean, certainly, clustery chords where you just really have almost no tonality is one way to achieve that. I don't know that I have any specific chords. I just wrote a cue yesterday. And I was just using this chord. I wasn't even thinking of it harmonically. It was like a minor third, a fourth, and then a minor third. So you have these four notes, and I kind of used it throughout the cue. It's like it just inspired me. And then the cue before that, I'm writing a ton of combat music right now, like combat cue after combat cue. So that's a challenge, And so like I was like, what can I do? And then I opened the Thesaurus of Scales and Melodic Patterns. Are you familiar with that book by Nicholas Slanimsky? And I just opened it up to some random page and found some pattern and just played a couple of notes and go, oh, that's cool. And that just, because half of the battle is just starting. Because once you start and you find something you like, that start suggests the next thing that comes, and then the next thing, and it just sort of moves the music along.
So, Garry, you're also a teacher at USC. You teach a course at SMPTV. Can you talk about that a little bit and what topics you cover there?
Yes, and the program is Scoring for Motion Pictures and Television. And it is the best program in the world, we think. For
it
scoring.
Is.
I think you're right. It's like
there's no think. It is.
It is. I would say. You know what? I'd say even objectively, it is considered the best program in the world.
Yeah.
And so I teach the scoring for video games class. That's what I teach, and that's all. that's what I've been teaching for 5 years there, and I enjoy it. I enjoy it very much. We just had a session this last Saturday with a live 12-piece band. I would say it's not really like a band, like it's like the 7 strings and some brass and a woodwind player. And but I have them compose music in various styles and in using various interactive techniques. And I talk about everything I know about the industry. I talk about orchestrating. I talk about writing aleatoric music. I talk about budgeting for a session, how you put together a session. I really talk about combat music. I talk about everything I know about, because I've been doing this for a long time. So I've done a lot of different things. From writing music for trailer music to game music to I've scored infomercials many years ago. I just didn't want to sell shoes. That was my goal in life. I don't want to sell shoes. I'm going to keep writing music. So I've done all kinds of things, and so I just talk about it all, and I enjoy it. I feel like I'm giving back. And I also have a special election. I have a special affinity for USC. I think it's an amazing school, and I just like being on campus. It's just really nice to get out of my studio too, because I work at home. My wife and son are here, and it's nice to go out and get it and talk with students and all that. So I enjoy it.
Well, I think we like to say, at least in the School of Cinematic Arts, and I'm sure probably for you as well in Thornton School of Music, that we feel that USC is like Hogwarts. It's just a really magical place where we are able to do really cool stuff and work with other cool people. And I know when I even talk to some of my colleagues out in the industry and I tell them some of the projects I'm working on and the research projects I'm doing, they're like, oh my gosh, that's incredible. Like, I wish I could work on those. So it really is a magical place. And I guess final question, Garry. Imagine this is the final day.
Is this like Final Jeopardy?
Final Jeopardy. Final day of class at USC, in your class. What would you tell your students before they go out in the world and look for work as a composer? What kind of gems of wisdom would you impart upon them?
Well, one of my favorite quotes is from Winston Churchill, who said, I paraphrase, it's quoted by different people, he said, never give up, never give up, never, never, never give up. If I had to give one piece of advice, that's kind of it, just don't stop. Because it is difficult. I think all the creative arts is a difficult way to make a living. And so the competition is fierce and intense, so you really have to have this very, very strong desire to do it. And you can't be easily dissuaded. If you're easily dissuaded, it's not a good business to be in, because you will get negative feedback. People won't hire you, people won't return your calls, people won't return your email. So it is that we talked about this, that grit, that just like I'm going to find my voice. Yep. Which is like being creative and really find, because ultimately I it's like there's a herd of people, and the people who succeed are the ones who stand out from the herd. So you have to find your own voice, and sometimes that can take quite a bit of time, and sometimes it's like dependent upon finding the right project where you can do something really interesting. So find your own voice, and be just absolutely unpersuaded to give up, that you just have to, because sometimes it can take many years, to achieve your goals, and you have to be, and you have to be smart with your money so that you can survive, and find ways to survive while you're getting your opportunities. And the interesting thing is that I really do believe that anybody who really is creative from a standpoint of finding work. There's all kinds of new opportunities all the time, especially in the age of the internet. There's ways of making money on YouTube. Who's this guy? Have you ever heard of PewDiePie? PewDiePie. Have you heard of PewDiePie, Dale? PewDiePie is not a composer, but he's
Come on, admit it, Dale.
No, I don't think I have, man. No.
Okay, he's just an interesting thing because PewDiePie, he's this Swedish guy. I forget his real name, and he talks about video games, and he's really funny. It's all in English, etc. And he gets ad revenue from YouTube. He makes between $4 and $7 million a year just doing YouTube videos. Look up PewDiePie. And you will see, look at some of his stuff, and you'll see he gets hundreds of millions of views, okay? And he gets ad revenue that adds up to $4 to $7 million. Now, this wasn't a job possibility 5 years ago.
Yeah.
And now and you don't have to, you may not match his $4 to $7 million, but if you can make a couple $100,000 a year with ad revenue from YouTube, or even 30 or 40, and have that be a part of your income source. So there's all sorts of ways, and I do talk about this in the class, like of being creative and finding ways to make money. There's these things called micro licenses now, where the people compose music, and you can license your music to hundreds or even thousands of people. In small, people pay $30 to get a micro license. So these are just two things that didn't exist, but because of the possibilities now with the internet, are potential ways to make money. People think of the big games or big TV shows or big films. Those aren't, maybe when you're starting off, you may not get those opportunities, but then eventually, you're writing lots of music, you're making money in different ways, and then when I first started out, I didn't even think of video games because that wasn't a possibility. So keep your eyes, ears, ear to the tracks, as they say, for that train that's way down the line, but it's coming. Be open to things you didn't expect as a way, to be creative, and never give up. Never give up,
Fantastic. Yeah. So what I've heard recently is that a composer has to also be an entrepreneur in order to survive.
Yeah.
And have multiple streams of income, whether it's playing, performing, whatever other things you can do, teaching as well.
Totally.
All of those things could be ways to earn revenue while you're working on your career. So.
Precise. Absolutely.
Well, Garry, it has been an incredible pleasure to have you on the Designing Music Now podcast. Thank you so much for your time. We are so honored, and we appreciate your time.
Thank you, Garry.
My pleasure. Really enjoyed it.
Awesome.
Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Garry.
Thank you for listening to the Designing Music Now podcast, a podcast dedicated to the craft of creating music for video games and interactive media. Please visit us at designingmusicnow.com for more info, news, and reviews on this subject. We would love to hear from you.